we let's step into the idea of we're going to do everything we can to extend the life of our existing plant, and we're going to have a vision in place of what the low carbon plant looks like. And you're absolutely right, bite-sized projects, we're going to get there one step at a time. So those of you who, I think back in 2020, we first presented this model, and it's gone through a number of refinements, a lot of them thanks to the work from the hospitals that are involved with greening healthcare. Let's run through this framework. And again, I want to use this as the backdrop to re-engage our panel around, okay, so we've looked at what we've got. We've identified we need to have planning time. We need to, there are areas that we can make improvements right now. But we're going to work our way towards net zero over time. And again, this framework we use across all building types. We developed this with Rocky Mountain Institute back in 2019. And it's the idea of zero over time, that we can't just convert everything to net zero overnight, because there aren't enough trillions of dollars in the world to make that happen. And the most cost-effective way of making this happen is at end of life of existing equipment. So, but the key then is that when equipment gets to the end of life, that we don't replace like for like, because now we've got a stranded asset in waiting. We replace like for a vision of the future, what's referred to here as a net zero vision. So the argument here in this next part of the conversation is every hospital should have in mind that vision, almost to the point of, and I know exactly where I'm going to put my heat recovery chiller on there, and I walk through my fan rooms and I can see where I'm going to put my heat recovery wheels, because as Amir was saying, load reduction is key. If we can get heat recovery on all of our ventilation from exhaust air, then the new plant's going to be that much smaller, and so on. So it's almost a different paradigm. It's one of Headwaters, you've heard on these panels before, one of their really smart operating folks talking about, since we had this conversation, I see the hospital differently. When I'm walking through the hospital, I'm looking at different things in a different context than they did before. But the essence of this fairly simple roadmap is, first, you've got base emissions on the far side here. You do everything you can with energy efficiency, because it drives immediate cash flow, helps pay for the rest. Then comprehensive heat recovery is absolutely the number one thing. And you see up here, you've got computer rooms, you've got refrigerators in the kitchen that may be air cooled, water cooled right now. You connect them up to the chilled water system, you bring them back and recover all the heat. So we'll look at this in a moment. Your mindset is no heat's going to escape this building without me scavenging everything I can out of it on the way. Step 3, you look at on-site renewables, and step 4, you look at credits. And it really is that simple. There's nothing else. Technology is going to enrich all of this over time. There are going to be new options, new possibilities. But this key down here is kind of number one item. You have to have a vision of where your hospital is going to be 10 years, 20 years from now, so that every capital and operational decision you make along the way fits in with that vision. Nothing gets wasted. We hardly have enough time to do it right. We'll never find the time to do it over. The core words around here, that this is not so much a technical exercise as a capital planning exercise. So I know for a fact we've got a whole bunch of capital planning and redevelopment folks on this call. We're thrilled to have you here, because it's a different approach to capital planning. It brings that net zero, that low carbon lens into every capital decision. And it all fits into, it's an asset management process. It's more than it is a technical process. So it's bringing these things together. But this roadmap, to say it's universal, commercial office sector is using it, colleges and universities following exactly the same model. It's 4 steps, and you optimize each one. And the idea of these little dots here, there's going to be projects attached to all of these things happening over time. Putting it into the areas for consideration. Again, all these dots are supposed to be big and small projects happening that takes you from where you are with a low carbon roadmap, whatever you want to call it right here. It's your plan. Through the asset management system right to the future of the low carbon heating plant, which might be in 2035 or 2025 or 2040, but it's out there. It needs to be part of that. And the simple stuff is up in The top left-hand corner, the light blue and the dark blue boxes, that's energy efficiency. Get on with that right now. So we see those projects down here. Those drive cash flow. They deliver immediate savings. Ideally, you get a deal that you can use some of that funding to help finance future work. But then all of the rest of these things up in this corner, anything that you do related to those has to go through the low carbon lens. So if you've got condensing units for the morgue right now, and it's an air-cooled condensing unit, over time it's going to become a water-cooled condensing unit, and you're going to find a way to connect it to the chilled water system to harvest all that heat as it gallops around. If you've got elevated penthouse cooling or electrical room cooling, you're going to look through all. If you've got medical equipment, it needs to be specified as water-cooled and arranged so that you can cool it through the central plant and recover that heat back. No more air-cooled condensers when you're walking around the hospital. Walk along the roof. If it's February, hopefully not too cold, and you see condenser fans whirring away, that's a target. So this, again, the change of vision, the change of perspective, looking at the hospital differently, and looking for all of these areas where we have the opportunity to make immediate improvements. So again, the slide deck will be up, as Michael said, will be available, and the recording of this this webinar will be available. But this is almost like your internal checklist. Your staff should be looking for all of these things. You should be talking to your clinical counterparts when medical equipment's being purchased. If there's a plan to replace exhaust fans or supply fans, heat recovery has to be part of it, so on. So this is the paradigm. And again, if we take that in terms of what does the transition process look like, and we'd encourage people to use this model. These are all the building systems that are part of your low carbon future. You know, from humidification, which is still a pain because right now it still needs steam, but I know a number of us are working on it. You know, is there an adiabatic solution that works in a healthcare setting? But water-cooled condensers, air-cooled condensers, medical equipment, all of this, these are the systems that are part of the conversation. The conventional plant addresses those things in a number of different ways. Exhaust fans typically just blow air away, and discharge water, warm, often hot, wastewater leaving the building just goes down the drain. So, you know, immediate interest in there. Very often the chilled water system already does some wintertime cooling and has a heat exchanger that connects to the cooling tower, which is winterized and looks like an ice madness. It's mayhem during the wintertime with icicles hanging everywhere. This is where we throw all of that good heat that we collect up in here, and we throw it away because that's the way it's always been done, and that's the way the world is. We've got a combination of steam boilers and hot water boilers. We've got pressure reducing valves that steal stuff away. We've got heat exchangers feeding into reheat, feeding into preheat, feeding into perimeter heat. This is almost, if you like, the metrics, the pieces of the systems and the process that runs through there. When we look at what that transition looks like, and then it's a whole different plant configuration. So where we may have had air-cooled condensers over here at one time, they're now going to be new water-cooled condensers, and they're going to connect into the chilled water lamp. That cooling tower is going to be disabled in the wintertime. Don't want to run it, no more electric heat trying to keep it on. The reheat is going to come from lower temperature hot water, ideally from the heat recovery chiller. So we've got that beast up here. But as I say, use this model, use this picture, and use it as kind of an overlay of each of your facilities to say, check off and color in and modify the left-hand side as to what you've got today, and prioritize the right-hand side. And we'll go back to again, so I'm hoping this makes sense, but if there are questions, then please use the Q&A box to go through. But this framework has proved remarkably robust as we've been looking at different configurations in very different kinds of facilities, mental health facilities, acute care facilities, ambulatory care facilities. This hangs in there fairly well. And again, the intent is just to remind you of oops, we were about to do this, and that's not a low carbon solution, and now we're going to do that instead. I think the final piece I wanted to share with you in this series is again, and this is complementary to and maybe a bit duplicative of what we've talked about already. But if you imagine your hospital over on the side here as those of us who studied engineering, we got a thermodynamic barrier that we're going to shrink wrap around the whole facility, and every place that we see heat escaping is a target, and it's all integrated. So, for example, the envelope heat loss, if we're replacing the windows, would triple glazing allow us to have a lower supply water temperature on the perimeter that would allow us to make better use of a heat recovery chiller in the future? So an envelope upgrade project will be viewed through the lens of how does this contribute to my future vision of the low carbon plant. The flue gas heat recovery, wanted to come back with you and Paul, I'd love your thoughts on this. The condensing economizer, we see there's a flue ACE unit, as I'm sure you know, at Grand River, and they can't make very much use of it because the water's not hot enough. But if you connect that very substantial amount of heat and upgrade it through a heat recovery chiller, man, you can do almost anything with that now. So this idea that everything old can be new again, you know, the technologies that may have fallen on the wayside over time can come back into vogue, and none of us yet has imagined how all these things can combine to achieve even more remarkable results than we've seen in some of the new hospitals now. So again, we put this out there for your consideration, and if it's helpful to you in developing the planning and making sure you've got the lead time to do things right. I wanted to, on Mike Rohans from Northwell Health, give you another, if you like, viewpoint of the future. They're doing some great work around dashboards. This is their Huntington Hospital on Long Island. And you know, the dashboard there keeps their whole team, their energy steering committee in play. Mike's using data from, so the idea is, as actually you've all mentioned so far, of data access, meaningful data is a huge piece around there. So we love what Northwell's doing on this front. And the other contribution from Mike is this idea under Local Law 97 that just hitting people with six-figure fines year after year for exceeding carbon caps, that's not the idea. We're trying to reduce carbon, and we aren't necessarily eye to eye with this being the appropriate hierarchy in a general sense of things. But the idea that Northwell, with multiple facilities, is developing this idea of to which facilities do which technologies and which recommissioning and controls upgrades, where do they apply? And the pathway to compliance idea that over time, this is the kind of cascading, the waterfall effect, stepping down to where we're going. So we think Northwell Health we see as being in a very good space around getting their heads around the fact we need a plan. We got a lot of facilities, they're all different, but it's the same principles that apply. And let's figure out how to feed these ideas in.
And we have a couple of questions if you want to pause for those.
That's the best news I've had so far. When everybody's quiet, you wonder if they've gone home.
Okay, so the first one was how to integrate, I guess, geothermal in the transition to the low carbon plant, specifically to existing hospitals.
Okay, and what's the other one?
There were two other comments just in general about how to integrate the wastewater, removing heat from the wastewater from sterilizers, or the Toronto Western project.
Okay, yep. Perfect. That's it's good to hear. So like we've been rehearsing, Michael, let's step into exactly that then, the second and at least as important Q&A session around so we talked at the beginning about the why. The why because it's the law, the why because it's the right thing to do. You know, we're leaving a mess to our children and our grandchildren. The why because it's going to cost us a lot of money not to comply. The what does this future low carbon plant look like? And the how how do we need to change our whole approach to capital planning and project development, the roadmap idea, what are our options in terms of financing, what are our options in terms of procurement, what kind of organizational changes do we need, like who does what and accountability. So this is kind of open season, but let's start respectfully. Brent, if I could turn to you, speak to the geothermal piece, I think at Peel Memorial, and where do you see that fitting into the big picture here with healthcare facilities? Because every building type is different, right? You've gone really quiet again.
Sorry, was that directed towards me?
That was towards Brent, Amir.
Oh,
You
okay,
guys hear me
sorry.
now?
Yes, we can. We could see your lips moving before, so
Yeah.
we knew you were paying attention.
Only one person would have to do this. It was you, but I'm going to do it. I'm just bringing the presentation, but we do see a big shift towards geothermal. The use of geothermal in healthcare facilities, obviously, but Corner Brook Acute Care was a project that we're working on that didn't have a mandate to go net zero carbon, but had some issues with fuel supply and reliable natural gas or propane. All they had was number 2. And when you look at what options are available to you to be able to meet the heating and cooling loads of a building like a large acute healthcare facility.
Brent, you said that was Corner Brook, Newfoundland?
That was in Corner Brook, yeah, the acute care facility there. You're not left with many other options, right? You electrify completely. You could, but could you accommodate that with the electrical infrastructure? Probably not. I mean, on Corner Brook, we did end up going electric on the steam production side for both humidification and sterilization. And when our electrical engineers did their calculations to figure out how big the electrical service should be to get into the building, they essentially fell off their chairs, right? It was the largest electrical service they had ever seen, larger than what we brought into, say, Humber River. And this is a facility that was probably about the third the size of Humber. So probably difficult to meet heating and cooling needs of most facilities in a net zero way, without somehow potentially incorporating geothermal in the future. Depends on your climate. I mean, I'm from BC and I do a lot of work in Vancouver. We're extremely lucky that we have, favorable climatic conditions where, air source heat is actually something that's viable to us. But, for most others on the call, I'm sure Miles is laughing because air source is not something that he probably looks at too much with temperatures in Manitoba. But yeah, in most of the country, I think we're probably going to see a lot more use of geothermal.
Let's stay the course on geothermal for a second, if we could. What we find most remarkable about hospitals is how much heat they throw away every winter. Like, it's amazing how many different places, and it's the nightmare vision of the hospital, right? You got steam hissing away and Terminator coming along in the background, and all of that. Where does so there's so much internally generated heat.
Yeah.
In as you guys have done the modeling in the energy balance of things.
Well, this is where geothermal is really interesting. Expensive potentially. Most sites, depending on what your site looks like, you may be able to go. If you've got lots of area on your site, maybe you can go horizontal and you have a cheaper field cost. If you're not that lucky to have a huge horizontal area and you need to go vertical, drilling those wells becomes quite expensive. And so when you're looking at energy recovery, those become more attractive. The payback on energy recovery becomes a lot more attractive because you want to reduce the load. You want to make the geothermal field as small as you possibly can, right? It's a no-brainer to have air-to-air heat recovery in new facilities, but you'll look for other places, right? You talked about, there's exhaust air streams that, we don't have outside air running through, but, can you suck heat out of those exhaust streams before they leave the building? Certainly you can, and you can put in, pretty reasonably large coils. We're looking at it on some facilities to get, quite a lot of heat out of those exhaust streams, right? If you can really subcool some of that air, you can really start to supplement, the heating demand of the building and really start to reduce, the demands that you put on, that geothermal field.
That's helpful. Amir, tell us a funny story about geothermal.
So it does seem like, you know, the example of Corner Brook is my favorite example, by the way, Brent, because I asked the pointed question, can you even go net zero without geothermal? And the answer given to me was no. At some point, you will have to add it. Now, that puts a dent into our plan where we're building a brand new hospital at South Niagara. And it's called South Niagara Hospital, SNH, we call it lovingly. And we said, okay, let's put a geothermal. We're building a brand new hospital. Let's plan a geothermal unit into it already. Well, turns out we can't. We're sitting on top of natural gas, huge reserve of natural gas. And if we end up drilling a hole into that, we're gonna blow up the hospital rather than, you know, have a geothermal unit. So I'm still not sure that, you know, we shouldn't go with a geothermal, i.e. as in a spread out geothermal unit rather than a drill down, but the cost goes up exuberantly. And then also, you know, I was shut down because money is running the world, right? And how do you find the funding and justify the funding? Because here's how I look at it. The difference between the planning, the operation folks and the planning and development folks who go do projects, they generally look at the end of the project. So they're using a lens where they're using, you know, reading glasses. I use that example always. And they're looking, you know, yay far, the project's gonna get done, it's done in time, with budget, within budget, and blah, 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 and then they walk away. Well, the life of the building is 50 years, maybe 70 years, 30 to 50 anyways. So what we need to do straight from the start, have the bifocal lens. We should plan out, and the business case should be to end of life, not to end of project completion. And that's where the problem sets in. But then how do you match those business plans with the funding that's coming from the government? That becomes a problem, right? Yeah. The budget is set at $1.4 billion, say, for example, at South Niagara Hospital, I think, give or take, whatever. Where are you going to cut to fit that bill, especially now that the cost of construction is going up? Well, guess what? My geothermal got shut down.
So if I may, Miles, can we look at this, the how piece? So these are good conversations about the what piece. And again, all of these discussions could take the rest of the day, but we just need enough out there to kind of feed some ideas coming through. On the how side, within the Manitoba health system, can you see areas that you're comfortable talking about where how things get done, how projects get conceived, how funding gets applied, how projects get procured? Can you see a kind of a high level, the kind of adjustments that are going to need to be made to pull this off?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you've talked about it already. Having a clear sense of direction is absolutely critical. I think aligning with leadership vision and commitments around sustainability and low carbon where they exist is absolutely one way to help keep teams realigning to this transition that has to happen, because it's about creating sustainable healthcare and lower cost healthcare.
Yep.
Moving away from fossil fuels. We know it's going to happen over time simply because it's not a sustainable path. I think that performance-based energy and GHG targets are essential to this discussion. We need to develop bold ideas, but they need to be deliverable. Focusing the design and a lot of the planning activity around outcomes is critical. So I like performance-based targets because they kind of broaden the responsibility a little bit to, from the design team to a much larger stakeholder base. So it's not just design and install the system and we're done, but rather operators, clinicians, more people are involved in the work to achieve that outcome. I really like the charts that you had about being clear on what makes a low carbon plant.
Yep.
We need to know what those elements are and how that affects the building systems connected to it. Heat recovery is essential. I mean, we can't waste anything, or we're never going to make the transition happen. And once we capture that, we need to maximize that energy, put it to its maximum use. So we also talk a lot about understanding performance and knowing the loads, because you need to also identify potential for energy reduction and heat recovery. What are the loads and what can they be converted to in terms of low carbon technologies? The projects kind of almost have to be ready to go. I'm sure this is talked about a lot, because if they're not ready to go, you don't have time to start from scratch to even apply to some of these funding organizations. So you don't have always a huge window of opportunity. I just have a couple more comments. I think the mindset we need to have is that every project that we do is an energy project in some way. So we need to consider what are our alternatives. We're seeing rising energy costs, we're seeing costs on carbon, and that's changing the economic balance points of energy efficiency, low carbon, and fuel source options. So, I mean, I just looked at a life cycle costing analysis today, where the overall total ownership cost was similar, within 10-15% of the base case, but yet the carbon went everything from a conventional system to almost zero. In Manitoba, where if we can electrify, we have a clean grid. So, I mean, that's huge. And to know that the total ownership cost is not that significantly different from the base case, but the capital cost is a huge difference.
So that's super helpful, Miles.
I just have one more comment, though.
Take it away. You're doing great. Yeah.
It's just one more, because I think you had said we're always lacking time, but I think that the important thing to realize about that is the largest impacts, the most influence we're going to have on a project is going to happen at the earliest stages of planning and design. So we need to consider these alternatives very early, and there is really limited time. Once the project gets going, a lot of the things fall off and the option bag gets a lot smaller. So,
okay, again, very helpful, because in the end, if we get the how right, if we get our processes right, how the decision-making process is right, the what's have a way of falling into place, right? Then they're readily accommodated, because you can put things into, if the process is not as functional as it should be right now, if it doesn't have enough time, doesn't have the right people at the table, it's very hard to, even if you got all the what's in mind, it's very hard to get them implemented and coordinated on the way through. I think, again, in the, let me do one last check. And Paul, if I may, I'm going to give last thoughts to you in just a moment about what hasn't been said here that people should have in mind on either the first discussion or the second discussion. But Michael, any other comments, questions?
So there are a couple of other questions. They might be a bit too broad for this discussion. So they're looking more at how municipalities can kind of react to implementing low carbon rather than the hospitals themselves. So one idea was the utilities providing the bore fields, and then they own that infrastructure and provide the heat as a utility. And then the other was looking at, I believe, municipalities removing the heat from the sanitary discharge lines as opposed to at the site level itself.
Okay, I picked up on that one. So as always, this is such a broad area, and it's going to be continually developing. So this will not be the last time Greening Healthcare addresses this. What we do next will build on there. The other area that I was hoping to explore with Mike Rohan, they have a lot of combined heat and power down there, and that the carbon world adds a really interesting dimension to that. I'd like on a future occasion, Paul, to look at the electric boiler. So when you're on Class A, you got pretty clean heat at a low price if you can use it when you need it and not. So I believe you did work with Mohawk College on that. The wastewater heat recovery, we'll definitely take a look and bringing that in. The Toronto Western project is fascinating. And the whole area, Markham District Energy and what they're doing with Markham Stouffville Hospital as their biggest customer, it does open up some fascinating opportunities. But here we've got Enwave supplying most of our big hospitals downtown, where again, can Enwave decarbonize their energy supply and take that load off the hospital? I love those questioning. So I think we got the feedstock for the next webinar on this subject, and I believe this is so important. We're going to be coming back to it at least twice a year. So stay tuned on that. But Paul, let me again throw this back to you from the Canadian Boiler Society perspective, from the big picture, which you're really good at with this stuff. What hasn't been said? What would you like to leave ringing in people's ears as they leave the session today?
I think a good caution for all those folks that are transitioning older plants and you're looking to buy time, add resiliency just to get through to the next facility. Look for alternative means to prop up your facility. If you've got only a few years left and you don't have connectivity for, say, a rental unit, that's a great way to not have to rush into a brand new traditional unit and bridge that gap. There's a lot of strong technology in rental boilers these days. So, you know, they're cleaning their act up as well. So that could buy you time. That's one note on the first discussion. On the second discussion, I think, you know, as we implement new technology, heat pumps, heat recovered chillers, we lower the loads, we reduce the loads on the traditional boiler plants. Just use caution for unintended consequences. As we have a larger span between different seasonalities and the requirement for heat, make sure that the boiler plant can take the turn down, that reduction in load, and that you don't accidentally create a scenario where you have excessive cycling, excessive wear and tear, or you push the boilers out of a condensing mode. And that would apply to condensing economizers as well, by recovering too much heat from something else, and that negatively impacts the boiler system. So, you know, a caution as you're going into good practice with good intention, understand it holistically from the heat load balance perspective. What is that going to do to your boilers now? And how is that going to get you to the next stage gate? So I think those would be my two comments. Did you want anything in particular, Ian, on the
that's
example?
No, Paul, that is perfect, and nicely takes me into just thanking the four of you. This I'd say there's so many dimensions. I mean, we work in this space just about all the time. There's so many dimensions to it, many of which we just hadn't thought about. And so this idea of bringing together the parties we had in this particular panel together, and looking forward to something similar with other perspectives next time, is so important. Everybody's struggling to get through this transition. We know it's important. We're not quite sure how to do it. Even the National Health Service is trying to build net zero hospitals, and there's a lot of work to be done to figure out how to make that work out. But thank you to all four of you, not just for today and sharing so openly everything that's in your minds, but also the time in the preparation session, which I found just as useful. I wish I'd recorded that one too, but this has been perfect. And again, our thanks to you all. And let's step along to our last little piece of the webinar today. Again, respectful of everybody's time. Greening Healthcare in Action. I'm going to run through this fairly quickly, but need to let everybody on this webinar know what's available to them, what are the areas that we're working on now. And there's a growing number of cohort projects. And if I could explain these very simply to you, that about 3 years ago, we began our first cohort projects. We were finding knowledge gaps, data gaps, information gaps, best practices, ideas that nobody had the same idea about how to do things. And we found within Greening Healthcare, we've got a lot of hospitals that care about this stuff, that are really smart. You've heard from a couple of them today. We got industry experts. You've heard from a couple of them today. We've got governments, we've got utility companies, Enbridge, the ISO are part of this. And bringing them together to focus on specific issues that can move the agenda forward. That's what our cohort projects are becoming, and they've mushroomed. We've got a bunch of them in place right now. I'm going to give you just a quick overview of each one of these, and the invitation to everybody on this webinar is contact us with, are any of these projects of interest to you, in which case we can give you a bit more detail and let you know if there's a place, if there's a role that you could play. So we talked about the low carbon central plant. We believe that every hospital needs a feasibility study, the model, the projection, the forecast, the assumptions, and we're looking to put together a cohort project with 5 hospitals and industry and government support to develop a template for what would that feasibility study look like. That's getting underway within the next couple of months. We're underway with Southlake and Headwaters on a project to look at best practices around LED retrofit and lighting controls. In particular, what are the economics of lighting controls when LED lighting uses so little power? But that project is primarily addressing a better audit and procurement process around LED conversions, very often which are like-for-like replacements that end up with spaces being too bright, too dark, and not delivering anything close to the electricity savings that were expected. High performance building system metrics, we're working with most of the new P3 hospitals and looking to bring in other jurisdictions. Alberta's looking at some of their new hospitals. The UK, we're looking for metrics there. But essentially coming through, what should the inputs be to modeling? What is good practice around watts per square foot and kilowatt hours per square foot for lighting, for fan power, for reheat, for process, for all of those different areas. So getting those metrics that will allow us to learn from the recent P3 hospitals and make the next generation of new hospitals more efficient still. The thermal wheel, enthalpy wheel, sensible heat recovery wheel optimization is a huge deal in terms of low-hanging fruit, both in terms of reducing peak demand. This project is centered in Alberta, where a number of heat wheel installations there are being studied, and we're adding units here and looking for industry players to work with us on getting the most out of the controls, the air balance, the maintenance, the functionality of these big heat recovery wheels, which we think are a central element of the low carbon future. On Friday, we're starting a Greening the OR project that for us is fascinating because it's initiated by clinicians. We were approached by Peach, which is Miles Sargent's environmental clinicians group, to say, we want to do something better in operating rooms, and we think the biggest thing we can do is ventilation setback. So Emia noted your comment on St. Catharines is leaving that to last. Let's get it right with non-clinical spaces. But we think the practice is there. We've got Mark and Stovall doing this, Women's College Hospitals, done great work. Trillium Health is looking to do a pilot project at the Queensway General ambulatory care site. That starts on Friday, but it's the first time we've had clinicians and facilities people working together on a project. We're super excited about that one. You'll see our next webinar is going to be the new hospital performance report. This year, it'll still be just Ontario hospitals, but we're looking and expecting to add hospitals from across North America and Europe to this report in 2023. The Rising Star, and we're almost done. The Rising Star idea is that we spend a lot of time focusing on the most efficient hospitals in greening healthcare and celebrating them. The ones that really need help are the ones that are less efficient. And we're looking for support to put together one-on-one charrettes with those hospitals to help them, as Miles was saying, make the connection with the data, with the metrics to identify exactly what they should be doing and when. So our hope is, our expectation is, most of our emissions reductions over the next 2 years will in fact come from that cohort, the ones with the biggest potential. Technology showcase, looking at case studies where we're looking at this wastewater heat recovery. We're looking at the specifics of the geothermal. So there are a lot of examples of technologies where we want to see them performing in action and then bring that to these webinars as case studies. And I'll share with you the International Federation of Healthcare Engineering, which is meeting in September in in Toronto in just a moment. Greening Healthcare has 2 sessions we're speaking at there. But the work we're underway with right now with the Australian Health Design Council in New Zealand and National Health and Kaiser and everybody else is, we're going to recognize the most energy efficient hospitals in the world. Now, they may not be, but if people aren't giving us their data, then they don't deserve to get recognized. So it's going to be the most efficient. Right now, I can tell you Humber River is number 2, and there's a hospital in the UK, which is number 1, and we'll be recognizing and profiling those at let me just go forward, at this event. So you should mark this in your calendar. It's finally we're doing things in person again, as the Canadian Boiler Society is with their upcoming conference. But just to say, we'll be speaking there. We'll be looking to connect with international delegates and really see if we can advance the agenda on what's good there. So that's all happening. Want to remind all the member hospitals that your annual reports just came out. And this, you're all in the health business, right? These reports are everything to you. This is your diagnosis. This is this table down here is how much you can save, how efficient you are. This tells you how you rank relative to other hospitals. This shows your savings the past year and summarizes the total. These reports come out annually, and we'd encourage you to take a look at this, because this really is your roadmap for efficiency over the coming year. And every quarter, you'll also be aware that you get your quarterly savings reports, where the blue dots are your actual monthly consumption, your red dots are the weather normalized baseline consumption, and over time you can track your progress. So every year we report to you on your savings potential and your actual savings achieved. These are seen to be the key elements to your ongoing planning around efficiency improvement. We did this one already, just in terms of dates, and I'm so happy with the time. Michael, we must have planned it or something. So for the program, September 17 to 22, just showed you that one, the IFHE conference. I'd suggest if you can, you take the time to be there. Harry Vandermeer from Alberta Health has finally got a travel pass, so he can come and join us. We're just thrilled, and we're going to make sure we make all the connections we can for Harry while he's in town, because there's a lot you can do in person that you can't do remotely. October the 26th, mark the date, will be our new hospitals performance report for the P3 hospitals for 2022. So show you which ones have improved, what the best practices. Mackenzie Bourne is in that report right now. And November 30th, we plan to do this in-person venue to be announced. Will be our annual forum, the first time we're getting everybody together, and that's where keynotes like Penny Ballum and Bob Collins are good enough to share their high-level perspectives, but it's also where we roll up our sleeves and figure out what are we going to have to do in 2023 to do even better. Once again, once you see this recording and you get the slide deck, please think about, are there any of the projects that I referenced there that seem like they might be interesting to you? And if so, get hold of Michael, and again, we can give you a bit more detail and figure out if there's a useful place for your hospital, for your business, and for the overall project running forward. And final kind of call to arms, if you like, that in terms of action, you can't put off the low carbon future, because it's got no patience. It's not waiting for us. It didn't give us a break during COVID. It just kept marching right along. So get ahead of the curve. We're here to do everything we can to help. And if either industry players or government or utilities or hospitals on the line that are not members right now, same as I said at the beginning, greening healthcare relies on the network effect. You all have a real contribution that you can make to the work that we're doing. And I believe that everybody has a real benefit that they can draw out of the huge work that's already going on. So please join us, get involved. And finally, Michael, our tireless program manager, you can always contact Michael on anything at any time. He's the data guy, he's the projects guy. And Amandeep, our technical director, is on this call today, and he's available to share everything that we're learning from all the hospitals we're working with out there, and help you make the connection with what it is that you're looking to do, what you need to do, and how to not reinvent the wheel, but take advantage of all the work that's come before. So as always, thanks everybody. We know how busy you are. Thanks for taking the time out for that. We look forward to chatting with you next time. Once again, our sincere thanks to the panel. This is everything we could hope for. I will revisit the recording when it's available, and we'll look forward to seeing many of you in September. Thank you so much and have a great day.